Final lecture in the lecture series for this year, and I'm really grateful for you guys for being here. If you have your smart technology, I'm sorry, my name is Rachel Bartron, and we're really pleased to have Dr. Kathleen Carlisle speak to us today about brain-based learning. There's a lot going on in the world of education right now, and a lot of it has to do with these kinds of things and how you use them wisely or how they distract our kids from learning. So we wanted to take a step tonight and pair together the biology of what's happening in the adolescent brain with the reality of what's happening in the world around them and put those two pieces together. So that's our goal for this evening. But we wanted you to not just listen, but also to see ways that technology can be really incorporated in fantastic ways in the classroom. So if you have a smart something, I would like you to go to this infused learning, but you're going to put student right there. You're going to put student.infusedlearning.com. And when you get there, it's going to ask you for a class code. And this is your class code right here, 71433. Now, just so you know, in the typical 9th grade classroom, they would be there already. Okay? They would already be there. And they'd be ready. All right, what am I supposed to do now that I'm here? Okay? So when you're there, okay, are you there? And you can put your name. And then I'm going to go, this is what it looks like to me as the teacher of the room, and so this is what I would see on my laptop that I could share with you, just like we're doing here in the classroom, or maybe not. And I'm going to ask you for a draw response, and this is really for those of you that have touch screens, okay? For a draw response, and it might work on the computer. And my question for you is draw a picture that says you're here tonight. Whatever you want to draw a picture that says you're here. Yes, yes. 71433 is the room ID. Thank you. I appreciate it. Some of us are going to guess. I have to look up. I'm stuck. I don't know that answer. Okay. Smartphone.
I don't know.
Okay. For those of you that can you get there okay? Or can you look on to someone? There we go. Oh, I like those responses so far. Now, in my classroom, I might use this to say, can you draw an amino acid? And they could pick the iPads up and right there show me that they could draw an amino acid. It's actually faster than walking around to every student and making sure that they could really draw that. So this is one application. And with that, keep these handy. We'll go back to them. I'm going to scroll down so we can see what else is here. It was a little rainy today. This is true. At the bottom, there's an arrow. Do you see the arrow that looks like you're downloading or something? Okay. So we'll come back and try this again. But look how engaged you are already. This can happen in the classroom. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carlisle, who I'm so glad is here with us tonight. Hi,
I'm Kathleen Carlisle, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the school counselor down at the lower school, and I'm also a school psychologist, and I teach part-time one class over at Misericordia too, psychology. So Rachel asked me to do this, and I had to do a little bit of research myself because there was a lot of stuff, particularly in terms of like how technology is now affecting our brain that I didn't really know about. We'll go ahead and we're going to have a few poll questions today. So we're going to start with one right away. There we go. Okay. At what age is the brain considered fully mature? All right. Now this is something where you can answer, yeah, on your smart device. I'm going to go back here. I have to show them the responses of it. I can tell you what they are. A is age 12. B, age 18. C, age 25. Or D, age 40s. At what age is the brain considered fully mature? Now, is it going to say their name next to the response so we know who gets it right and who gets it wrong?
Yeah, so we wouldn't necessarily project this in the classroom. We would use this for
Oh, really? All right. I'm not going to say the right answer yet. So if there's a red X, does that mean I got it wrong? I just want to tell us who's somewhere. Okay, there we go. That's all. All right, so C is the big response? Okay. All right. Yeah. Switch it back. All right. I'll answer that in a second to see if you're right or not. Okay. So when we're talking about brain-based learning, the first thing I want to talk about is a little bit about how the brain changes from childhood through adolescence into adulthood. And there's three main ways that the brain is changing as it's growing and maturing. The first is size. Basically, by age 6, your brain is about 90 to 95% of adult size. So there's not a lot of growing physical size-wise of your brain after age 6. Most of that is 0 to 6. What changes after that, primarily, is complexity. The complexity of neural systems. We're going to do a quick review of neurons. Very quick. All right. This is a neuron, a nerve cell. We've got the dendrites here that receive messages, the axon, where the electrical signal travels down, and then the terminal branches, or the terminal buttons, where there's a little synapse there, and it goes on to the next neuron. This here is the myelin sheath, which is the insulation for the cell, which makes the electrical signal travel down, so just like insulation on your wires in your. Okay, so there's what a cell looks like. This is the little up close of the terminal button or the terminal of the axon meeting up with the next neuron. So what you want to think about is like a tree with lots of branches, branching out and like maybe touching the branches of other trees. Okay, so just one tree with lots of branches. So when they're all connecting together, it looks kind of like a dense forest, like this. I like this picture. All right, so let's go back. All right, so when the complexity is changing, what that means is those neurons, the parts that are like the branches, are growing. You get more and more of those branches that are reaching out and connecting to other neurons. That basically occurs from ages 6 to 12. And in fact, when you're around 11 or 12, that's the bushiest they're ever going to be. That's the most neural connections that you're going to have in your lifetime. Lots of synaptic connections are made. At age 11 or 12, something dramatic happens, and that is called pruning. And actually, it's not the first time it's happened. Pruning is just what it sounds like. Think about, you've got the tree with all the branches, and you cut a bunch of the branches off. Okay, the tree's still there, it just has a lot fewer branches. Same thing happens with your neurons. The first time it happens is actually before you're even born, a couple months before birth. There's a major pruning that happens in utero. You have way more neurons in utero than you do now. The number of neurons you have is the most dead, and then there's a big pruning back right before you're born. And in fact, there's some speculation that autism is caused by either insufficient or abnormal pruning that occurs before birth. There's a little bit of research to support that, but it's kind of a new thing. There's a second wave of pruning, and that begins in late childhood, around age 11 for girls or 12 and a half for boys. And that doesn't change the number of cells, but it changes the number of connections. Or remember, it's bushiest at age 11 or 12, and then it gets cut back. And it actually gets cut back by almost 50%. It's a lot of trimming that's done. Some hypothesize that the psychological disorders that occur in late adolescence, like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, the ones that start then, are also a result of abnormal or insufficient pruning that occurs. So this pruning occurs for the next few years through adolescence and through the late teen years. And while that's happening, while that pruning is happening, the white matter, which is the myelin insulation for the axon, that increases. Okay, so what you end up with are fewer connections, but faster connections. So the goal of all this is efficiency. Okay? Your brain wants to be really efficient. It doesn't have to be able to do everything, but the things that you need it to do, the things that you use all the time, it has to do very quickly and well. All right, so the goal would be efficiency. So what is it that gets pruned? Basically, whatever's not being used is what gets pruned. So it's kind of a use it or lose it rule, especially in your teenage years. So if you stop taking piano lessons when you're 10, that ability, some of it, is going to be lost. All right? If you don't study any type of mathematics or foreign language in your teenage years or before that, some of that facility is lost. It doesn't mean that you'll never be able to do that, but it just means that you won't have the same facility that you would have if that area had never been pruned in the first place. In other words, it's a really bad time to sit around on the couch and watch TV all day long or play video games all day long, because that's what you're training your brain to do then. That's what you're training your brain to be as an adult. It's also a really bad time to be experimenting with drugs or alcohol, because of the fact that those things actually change, they can change your brain chemistry. At a time when your brain is changing and still like growing and forming, you're changing the way it's growing and forming. Sometimes permanently. So the answer to our question is, when does that pruning stop? When is it considered to be pretty much mature? That occurs when the prefrontal cortex, or this part of your brain, is fully mature. This is the last part of your brain to mature. It's the part that's right here in the front. It's responsible for planning, setting priorities, weighing consequences, inhibition of behaviors or inhibitions of responses, organizing your thoughts, and some regulation of emotion. And it matures around age 25. Which is why you can rent a car at age 25, and why your car insurance rates go down at age 25. The car people know more about this stuff than we do. So in teenagers, these skills are not fully developed. Surprise, surprise, okay? So there's some implications for the legal system and for levels of responsibility when you think about this. I know there was some people took to court whether or not it was it should be legal for someone who was convicted of a crime as a teenager to face the death penalty. And I think in most places now that's not allowed anymore. If you committed the crime as a teenager, you cannot be submitted to the death penalty. And that would make sense. And it's not so much that the knowledge of right or wrong is not there. It is there. The knowledge is there. It's all this stuff, the weighing of consequences, suppressing of impulses, even regulating of emotions, all those things that also impact our behavior. There's a famous adolescent psychologist and researcher named Lawrence Steinberg. He's written a bunch of textbooks like adolescent psychology, adolescent development. And he was actually asked to consult on the youngest detainee in Guantanamo, who was, at the time that he was captured, he was 15. Omar Kadir, was his name, Kadir, I'm not sure. But he was interrogated for hours and hours, and he finally confessed to throwing a grenade, which he said killed an American soldier. Then he later recanted that confession. So Lawrence Steinberg was called in to consult on whether or not he really was guilty, and if he was, what level of responsibility should he have for that? He brought up the point that adolescents are more likely than adults to give false confessions. I don't know if some of you guys, some of adults might remember the Central Park jogger case. And actually there was a bunch of teenagers who confessed to that, and it later turned out that it wasn't them at all. It was a convicted serial rapist who was later identified as the actual person who did it. But under pressure, they were able to, they confessed and they truly believed that they did it. So we've got changes in the prefrontal cortex going on. All these things are developing. On top of that, there's other changes that are going on in adolescence anyway. Right? One main one is the timing of the rise and fall of melatonin. Melatonin is one of the chemicals in your body that's responsible for making you sleepy, putting you to sleep at night. For children and for adults, it starts to rise in the late evening and you get tired and you go to bed. For some reason in adolescence, it occurs much later in the evening than it does for children and for adults, resulting in later bedtimes and later rising. At the same time, teenagers need a lot more sleep because their body's changing so much. They're physically changing and growing, and their minds are changing and growing too, which requires a lot of energy, which requires a lot of sleep. Between 9 and 10 hours a sleep. How many of you guys that are teenagers here are sleeping 9 or 10 hours a night, usually? How many people get 7 or less hours a night usually? How many people get 5 or less, usually? Bad for learning. All right, there's a big link between sleep and learning. Sleep consolidates your learning, and there's actually some famous studies that were done where they had kids studying for an exam, and then they had one group go to bed at a particular time, and another group stayed up 2 hours later and continued studying, and then they all got up at the same time in the morning and took the exam. The group that got 2 extra hours of sleep did better on the exam than the group that stayed up those 2 extra hours studying. Sleep consolidates learning, particularly REM sleep. There's an influence of technology on that. How many of you guys sleep with your smartphones next to your bed and hear it whenever it buzzes? You get a text in the middle of the night or several times a night. Does anybody ever get woken up by their cell phones buzzing next to them? Yeah. That interrupts sleep, and if it's doing that all night long, even if you're not becoming fully awake, you could be woken up enough that you were bumped out of REM sleep, which is the part of the sleep that helps you consolidate your learning. And so if that happens, it's actually kind of like sleep apnea. People who have sleep apnea stop breathing when they sleep, so they like kind of snort and wake up a little bit and they go back to sleep, but they never get down to that deep sleep that they need to. And as a result, they have all kinds of fatigue, they have learning problems, obesity is linked with apnea or not getting enough sleep. So a lot of bad things about not getting enough sleep. So that's one thing, teenagers need sleep. Another big change, of course, is hormones. Hormones cause mood changes. All right? In adults, the area of the brain that is primarily responsible for regulating emotions is your prefrontal cortex. We talked about that a little bit already. We also rely a little bit on the amygdala, which is a part of your brain that kind of does gut reactions, okay, your first impulse. In teens, it's the reverse. They rely mostly on the amygdala, the gut reaction area, and much less on the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is part of the limbic system, which is responsible for processing emotions and interpreting social information. So changes in the different hormones cause teens to be more emotional, more responsive to stress, and more interested in rewards, but less responsive to rewards. Meaning, in other words, they seek rewards, but they get less of a rush from them. Like if you give a little kid a sticker, they're really excited about that. Okay, if I were to give you a sticker, how excited would you be? Probably not that excited. But like a Happy Meal toy is a big deal when you're a kid. But as a teenager, it takes a little bit more than that. I mean, you need something a little bit more expensive to get that same kind of rush most of the time. So that leads to boredom and sensation seeking. It's not that they're trying to be troublemakers or anything like that. It's like they're looking for that same level of rush and reinforcement that they used to get from a sticker, but they don't get that anymore. Again, this is one big motivation for experimentation with drugs and alcohol, looking for that kind of sensation. There was a study done where they looked at teens and adults' brains with MRIs while looking at pictures of faces. And teens were less able to correctly identify emotions on faces. They tended to see sadness and anger where there was none, which might explain why a bunch of students sometimes think, like, oh, my teacher hates me. They're reading into emotion that is not necessarily there, and that's because the reliance is more on the amygdala than on the prefrontal cortex. Right. Another big change is going on in the cerebellum. Cerebellum is responsible for coordination, motor coordination, but also for coordination of mental processes. So think about like when you're growing and you're kind of like, you're gangly sort of, and you don't have your motor coordination yet. It's similar to that in an adolescent brain where all the pruning is occurring and it hasn't really evened out, hasn't settled. You don't really have the same kind of mental coordination that you would as an adult, and it results in like clumsy thinking. The good side of this is that adolescents have a huge capacity for creativity and thinking outside the box. Okay, they're flexible in their thinking. This is very convenient if you're going to rationalize why it's okay for you to cheat on a test, but not for them to cheat on a test. So it's good for rationalizing, but it's also good for coming up with novel solutions to problems and novel ways to use technology, novel ways to do things. Most of the people that have, most of the scientific discoveries and inventions that have been made by people who are fairly young, in their early 20s. That doesn't mean that every single thing, but it's more likely that if you're going to do something novel, it's going to be when you're younger rather than when you're older. So the result of all this changes are sleepy, grumpy, moody, irrational, yet possibly brilliant students at the upper school. All right, we have poll question number 2 coming up here. All right, which of the following phrases best describes you? Over 25, enjoy roller coasters. Under 25, enjoy roller coasters. Over 25, do not enjoy roller coasters. Under 25, do not enjoy roller coasters. Sure. The first one, A, was over 25, enjoy roller coasters. B, under 25, enjoy roller coasters. C, over 25, do not enjoy roller coasters. And D, under 25, do not enjoy roller coasters. Which one best describes you? All right, so most of you guys are with smart devices are under 25 to enjoy roller coasters. Okay, so here's over 25 right here. Here's under 25. This is like, this is do not like. We'll give it another minute to see if we get all the responses. But it does seem like more people who are under 25 enjoy roller coasters than people are over 25 and enjoy roller coasters. Why is that? You know, we have to go back. How many people of you that are over 25 used to enjoy roller coasters? This is another big difference in adolescence, risk-taking. Sensation-seeking we talked about a little bit already, but that also leads to risk-taking. Children and teens are big risk-takers. Remember, evaluating consequences is not a strong point yet in the teenage brain. However, they're mostly able to correctly identify possible negative consequences of actions. It's not like they don't know that something bad can happen. They just did it anyway. Knowledge did not equal action. And one of those is because risk-taking or thrill-seeking is actually more enjoyable for teens than it is for adults. Your brain makes it enjoyable. Teenage brains makes it enjoyable for them to engage in risk-taking behavior, where it is not in adults. I know when I was a kid and a teenager too, I could be on any kind of spinning ride, like the one where the floor drops out and you're stuck to the wall, any kind of teacup ride, I was completely fine with. I had to go with my kids on the teacup ride 3 years ago. I thought I was just I can't stand any kind of spinning. I don't know if it's been pruned out of me or what, but your brain does change. So you don't enjoy the risk-taking stuff like you do when you're a teenager. One interesting thing is the impact of peers on risk-taking behavior. They did an experiment where they had like kind of a visual simulation of driving, and there was a yellow light, and people had to stop or not stop at the yellow light in this visual simulation. And they looked at teenagers and adults about, you know, stopping versus not stopping. And there wasn't a huge difference between their behavior. There was somewhat, I mean, teenagers in general were more likely to be risk takers. what they saw a big difference in is this. They had, one part of the experiment was the individual was by themselves in the car. And the second part of the experiment was they had peers, either teenage peers or adult peers for the adults, in the pretend car with them. Now for adults that made no difference. Whether they were by themselves or whether they were with peers, they drove the same. For teenagers, it made a big difference in their risk-taking. When there were peers in the car with them, they were way more likely to try to run a yellow light or take on a risky situation like that than they were when they were by themselves. And someone was just telling me that there's actually a driving law now about being able to drive with peers that, I don't know, does anyone know what that law is now? What is that?
Under 18, you can only have one other person in the car with you unless it's sibling.
Okay. Well, I think that would make sense. I mean, I'm assuming that that's because a lot of accidents are when teenagers are together. This is also influential on teen criminal behavior. Most criminal behavior in teens is done in groups, is done with peers. So it's a big influence on the risk taking. All right, next poll question. At what age do neural pathways stop growing and changing? Okay, A, age 25, B, age 55, C, age 70, or D, they don't stop. At what age do neural pathways stop growing and changing? 25, 55, 70, or they don't stop? All right, well, you guys are right about this one. They do not stop growing and changing. So what changes in the brain as new information is encountered, even after age 25? The connections, your neural pathways change, the neural complexity changes. And your environment has a huge impact on that. This is a graphic that I use sometimes in the psychology class. This is the impoverished environment for the rat. He's in a cage with basically nothing else in it. Versus the enriched environment. There's other rats in there, there's stuff to climb on, play with, all that kind of stuff. This is the rat brain cell in the impoverished environment versus the enriched environment. And it's the same with your brain cells. And when you're in an environment that is very stimulating for you, you're learning new things, you're trying new things, your brain cells look more like this. They grow. And it doesn't matter how old you are when you're learning something new or doing something new. The same thing happens. It actually was a huge difference for this study with the rats. They only did this for 60 days, so it was 3 months that they were in there. I don't know how long that is in rat time, maybe a couple of years. But they actually had 20% more synapses, or those little connections between the neurons, when they were in the enriched environment, and their brain weight was actually like 10%. So how do different subjects that we study change our brains? Now, I couldn't do every single subject, but I kind of tried to pick a few representative ones. And the first one is music. Just plain listening to music, we already know can have a big impact on your mood, for one thing. Can help your mood, can make you feel energized. If you listen to something that pumps you up, it can make you feel calm. It can help you to concentrate on what you're doing. And it can even help with problem solving just by listening. And in particular, it seems to have to do something with the beat of the music with problem solving. Like a rhythm to the music helps. It actually helps with muscle coordination for people that have Parkinson's disease or are doing like rehab for different physical disabilities. Putting something to a beat helps the movement become more smooth. And it seems to be similar with thinking. Thinking to a beat somehow helps the thinking process to be more smooth. So it helps with problem solving. But playing music, learning to play an instrument or learning to read music has a completely different kind of effect on the brain. Particularly if you're learning before age 12 or before that big pruning occurs. And it actually makes you, like, for example, you could tell pitch better. If you studied music at a younger age, you can then, you have a musical ability that you would not have if you studied it later, particularly for like discriminating between pitches and things like that. If you study music, it is easier to learn languages, and perhaps because people would say music is its own language. I don't know the reason for that, but it seems to be easier to learn languages if you study music. And then just think about putting things to a beat helps learning in general. Like we have songs to learn things. We give little kids songs to learn things. The ABC song or the Days and the Beat. I'm sure there's other songs. I know there's some really good like states and capitals. But just being able to put something to a beat, even if it's not an actual song, just a beat that you have to learn, helps the learning. All right, so music changes, studying music changes your brain. Foreign language. Studying foreign language changes your brain. There was a study done at the Swedish Armed Forces Interpreter Academy, where recruits have to learn new languages at a very rapid rate. They're supposed to go from no knowledge of the language to fluency in 13 months. So they wanted to look at these people's brains. So they did MRIs at like 3-month intervals to see if their brains changed. And they had a control group too. And the control group was a group of people studying medicine or cognitive science at a local university. So also some rigorous studying involved there, but just a completely different subject matter. Both groups studied hard for a 3-month period, and then they were given the MRIs before and after to look at brain changes. The brain structure of the control group remained unchanged, but parts of the language group actually grew. Parts of the brains of language students actually grew, particularly the hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for declarative memory and learning. Declarative memory is like explicit memories, things that you are learning right now. Like if what I'm telling you right now is all declarative memory. Okay, this is what you need to have in your working memory right now so that it can go into long-term memory storage. There's a famous case called this person called Clive Wearing. You can find it on YouTube really easily, where there's damage to certain parts of the brain. And one of the things that he doesn't have the ability to do anymore is to form new memories. He can remember everything before this particular accident that took away that part of his memory. He has new learning, for example, like how to get around in his, like the home that he's living in, it's a new home. He's learned his way around, where his things are in his drawers. But if you walked in, introduced yourself, had a conversation with him, left the room, came back in 2 minutes later, he wouldn't know who you were or remember the conversation at all. That's what the hippocampus does. Okay? And the reason that's so important is because you have to have that in order to learn something. Okay? If you can't get it into your long-term memory, or if you can't get it into your hippocampus, it can't get into the long-term memory. So actually, this increased. Another area was the cerebral cortex. That seemed to increase as well. But what's interesting to me, too, is there have been studies done on bilingual and multilingual groups and brain functioning in later life. And one of the things that they noticed is that people with Alzheimer's who were bilingual got the Alzheimer's 4 or 5 years later than people who were not. So it actually delayed Alzheimer's. It also delays any kind of dementia or mental decline. Just knowing it, not currently studying it, but just knowing, or at one point in your life being bilingual, helps your brain later on in life. Studying unfamiliar languages makes the brain work about as far as it can. And people who are bilingual also seem to focus better on they're better at focusing on relevant information and ignoring irrelevant information. So that helps them to be better at multitasking. And the good thing is that even those of us who are not bilingual from a young age, just studying a foreign language now can even help with that. So that's good. All right. So foreign language changes your brain. Math changes your brain. The problem with this is there's lots of different kinds of math, so it's difficult to generalize about what it does to your brain. But the basic idea is that it encourages flexibility in the way that you approach problems, and not just math problems, but even just problems in your life. Different tasks, different math tasks use different parts of the brain, like memorizing times tables is actually a verbal task more than any type of a mathematical task. Estimating answers is a spatial task. So different parts of the brain are used, but people who study math in general have greater crosstalk between areas of the brain. So different areas of the brain are communicating more in people who study math than in people who have not. And I think they think that's what helps with the flexibility and problem solving. I came across a lot of interesting studies about math anxiety, so I just wanted to say a quick note. What was funny to me was that The studies show that math anxiety produces actual physical pain in the brain. Some of you guys might know that. The good news is that that's only apprehension. When you're actually doing the math problems, that's not the case. So the advice is, don't think about the math, just do the math. And you won't have math anxiety. All right, so math changes the brain. All right, this was what I was personally interested in. Literature, does literature actually change your brain in any way? Go ahead and read these first two sentences to yourselves. What's interesting about this is that what they found in studies of particularly prose is that reading prose stimulates your brain very similarly to if you were actually experiencing whatever it is you're reading about. Okay, for example, when you read a sentence, she pulled the warm cinnamon rolls from the oven. I said the word cinnamon. Your olfactory centers of the brain are activated. When you read the second sentence, it's leathery hands grip rope. Leathery and gripped actually stimulate your sensory and motor cortex areas of the brain. It's not like your eyes are just mixing it. It's all different parts of the brain depending on what you're reading. Even if you're reading about people, like suppose you're reading some like thriller or a spy novel and you're trying to figure out who you can trust and who you can't trust and is that person being sincere, it's exactly in your brain the same as if you were actually with a person trying to figure out the same thing. So evaluating motives, feelings, consequences are just like in real life relationships. Now close reading like history textbooks or science textbooks are more stimulating for the brain because they require more effort. But they wouldn't necessarily, depending on the content, they wouldn't necessarily stimulate the same parts of the brain as other types of reading. But there's still helpful just because when you require effort, you're stimulating the left lobe of the brain. All right. This is another area that I was really interested. I didn't know anything about it actually, so I did some research on it. And what was interesting to me is that exercise is one of the biggest ways to improve your brain. And I wouldn't have necessarily put those two together. But just exercising increases the size of your hippocampus, which remember helps with memory formation. We used to think that nobody grew new neurons. You had what you had and that was it, nothing regrew. But that's actually not true. We do have some capacity to grow new neurons. And exercise apparently encourages the growth of new neurons and helps form connections with the new neurons to help like attach them to the system that's already there so they don't just kind of like wither out. They've also done studies about exercising before taking a test. Like 10 minutes of exercise before ERBs or before some type of a standardized test actually improves kids' scores on that test. So exercise has a positive influence on learning and brain development. So bottom line, everything we study changes our brain. Okay? Everything we study is going to strengthen and grow those neural pathways. So the brain is like a muscle. It changes and gets stronger when it's used. So however you use it is going to be strengthened in that way. All right, we have another poll question here. All right. This is about surfing the internet. Surfing the internet is beneficial for short-term memory, associated with attention problems, less stimulating to the brain than reading a novel, as stimulating to the brain as crossword puzzles, or all of the above. And I'll read this again. Okay, so surfing the internet is A, beneficial for short-term memory, B, associated with attention problems, C, less stimulating to the brain than reading a novel, D, as stimulating to the brain as crossword puzzles, or E, all of the above. You think all of the above, or less stimulating to a brain than reading a novel are the top two. That's interesting. Nobody got the right answer to that one. I'll tell you just a second. It says stimulating to the brain is crossword puzzles. All right. This is what I was going to say: is that the internet, for skilled internet users, which is basically all teenagers. And most adults now, searching the internet was as stimulating to the brain as mental exercises, such as crossword puzzles, because it requires sorting, evaluating, making lots of quick decisions about what's useful, what's not. It requires some nonlinear thinking. You don't usually look at a website and just read it straight through. I mean, you have to jump around, and that's would be considered nonlinear. So it's actually a good exercise for your brain. I mean, obviously that's not all you want to do all day long, but it's stimulating for your brain. You want to keep your brain growing, don't atrophy. What about memory, though? This was an interesting one. We were talking about this one a little bit at dinner. Remember, the brain is a muscle, so using it improves it. Memory is very similar to that. Using your memory improves your memory. It can be fatigued if it's overtaxed, like cramming the night before an exam, you can, overtax your memory. But in general, practice improves your memory. Some people say that almost anyone can learn to memorize long lists of things if they use like certain mnemonic devices or whatever. But as far as we know, there is no limit to long-term memory. Okay? I think that the record now for memorizing digits of pi is it's something like 34,000. It's ridiculous. Which is amazing to me because there is no pattern in the digits of pi. Okay, so you're just memorizing random numbers, and obviously spending a really long time memorizing numbers. I don't think everybody has the ability to do that, but I think a lot of people have more memory capacity than we use. I think that smart devices usually result in less exercise for memory. How many people knew all their friends' phone numbers when they were kids growing up? Okay, how many people know all their friends' phone numbers now? Like if you lost your smartphone, would you know any of your friends' phone numbers? Probably a few phone numbers, but probably not very many. And I think for teenagers, I don't know if you've ever known your friends' phone numbers or not. I just put them in the one time, that's it. But so I think that there's an effect on how much memory you need to use with smart devices now, and that does have an effect on your ability to memorize things. Attention span and shallowness of processing. I'm going to talk about those two things together. Does technology hurt our attention span or make us process things less shallowly? There may be some truth to that. There is research about early TV watching being correlated with ADHD. It's correlated. Okay? It doesn't mean it necessarily causes ADHD, but there seems to be some type of relationship between the two. I couldn't find any information on internet use or video game use and attention. And it's got to be out there, particularly the video game use. But what's interesting to me is that, okay, if the internet was stimulating to the brain, more so than reading prose, you can maybe think it's a little bit more similar to reading poetry, where it's less linear, it's usually a shorter attention span required for poems. You don't have to start at the beginning of a poetry book, you can kind of jump around. Is poetry less valuable because it requires usually a shorter attention span and is less linear? I would say no, and I would say that poetry requires connections all the time, images, and I think that technology is maybe more similar to that, where it's not necessarily a bad thing that it requires a shorter attention span or shallower processing. It's just a different way of doing things. I think you need to find balance. That'll be our next topic. Clearly, technology has a huge impact on the acquisition of information because you can get any information that you want. So in that way, I think it's had a really positive effect on learning because you can learn loads of info just by doing a little bit of research. Because imagine if I was trying to do this research in high school. Like if I had to do this presentation in high school, trying to get all this information together, and going through microfiche, copying stuff, I mean, it would have been ridiculous. I can't even imagine. And you guys don't even know what that is, do you? One of my middle school classes one time, there was a scenario, it was like a, I don't even know what it was, but something about somebody's tape deck was stolen. It was like an old scenario. And we're all like, what's the tape deck? All right. So finding balance, I think, is the main issue here. How many people put away their devices or turn off all their devices at meal times? Some people do. Okay, good. Or when you're with your families, maybe you do. I think that would be an important thing. What about turning off your phone at night or silencing it so it's not buzzing and waking you up in the middle of the night? That's a really good idea. Like we talked about with sleep being so important for learning. Uninterrupted sleep being really important for learning. So keeping a running dialogue too, I think, between children and parents about the use of technology and how much time is being used. When we talk about exercise being so important, for everybody, for us too, but for kids in particular, how often does technology interfere with exercise? Or they're doing that instead of, being outside playing. And I know the world is different now. You can't just let your kid go outside and run around the neighborhood like maybe you used to do. But it's still important for brain development. One thing I think that's really great about STEM is the diversity of subjects that students are exposed to. And most STEM students are not spending their time outside of school playing video games, or at least not very much time, because they're studying really hard. Or they're involved in sports, or they're involved in whatever club or activity or mock trial that takes 25 hours a week. So they don't have time for anything else. So I think all that the diversity of experiences is really good for stimulating all different kinds of brain work, particularly for teenagers, because that stuff's not going to be pruned. You're using it, so you get to keep it. Yeah, use it or lose it. Polling, or any type of interactive game that technology can use for you, can use in your classroom. It's supposed to be really helpful for learning as well, because it's more interesting. It raises your level of endorphins. Students are more invested when they get to look and see their responses versus other people's responses. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with technology, but technology sure makes it easier. Collaboration with Google Docs and things like that for some adults. I didn't know what this was as of probably a year and a half ago. It's where you can go online to a document and everybody can go on at their own homes and make changes on the document or add sentences to it. And everyone's working on the same document. Studying, there's lots of online study tools that I'm going to ask you guys about, see which ones you guys use and are helpful, that are probably more fun or easier than traditional study tools like making note cards. And the last thing I wanted to say was one topic of attentional blindness. Attentional blindness is a phenomenon basically where you only pay attention to a very little bit of what's going on around you. And you have to, that's your brain's decision, right? There's tons of stimuli coming in all the time. You decide, your brain decides what's important to focus on, and that's what you focus on, one thing. The good thing about this is that you block out stuff that's not important. And actually in kids with ADHD, or adults with ADHD for that matter, this is not working right. They pay attention to too many things, right? And as a result, they're not paying attention to the right things all the time. I think this is someplace where parents can help. The internet and technology is, I think, like a sea of distractions. It's so much. And I think a lot of times students don't necessarily have the required background knowledge to make decisions about what is important and what is not important. And I think that's one place that adults can be helpful. It's providing a little bit of that background knowledge. So the last thing we're going to do is our reverse question and answer. Do you have this up there? Do you have it already typed out? Okay, all right. First thing, and this is for adults too, not just teenagers, and you can just type in your response. What technology tools or online resources do you find most helpful for learning and organization? I'm just curious as to what people use and what's helpful. What technology tools or online resources do you find most helpful for learning and organization?
Oh, good. Thanks, Chris. Good job. Oh, nice. That's how I got my information. Facebook? Who's studying on Facebook? Are there?
Yeah, we did get a yes network, but I've been trying, and I guess we couldn't get on that.
Oh, okay.
It says waiting for you.
Well, you can just, I bet you have a lot of stuff. I mean, you probably.
I know, but I'm stuck because I was too busy getting the yes network.
It should
Oh, well.
it should allow you to do
It should, you use this? It's not, no.
What's
I just
Quizlet
pull
on
everywhere.
Google Docs?
Just in there.
Who said Quizlet?
Oh, I said Quizlet.
What is Quizlet?
It's like a site where you can make flashcards
Okay.
Or they have pre-made flashcards for different subjects.
That's cool. And then like you just click a button and it like flips the flashcards.
And you can make new ones on it too.
Oh, that would be cool.
Is that Richard Miller? It makes up games for you too, right?
What?
Like matches games on
Yeah, it has different games you can do.
So you make the note cards online and then it will like give you questions and
Yeah,
answers about?
or for most books, it has the note cards pre-made. Like I got it for my lab book, it has got most of the subjects.
That's really nice. All right, so lots of different things. Quizlet, Spark Notes, Noodle Tools. I don't even know what Noodle Tools is either. Do you know what that is?
It's the author.
And you can spell it like any style? Okay, very good. All right, so it looks like Google. I mean, Google Docs is a huge one. Google Tools, okay, that's good to know. All right, next question.
I'll just say,
Yeah.
it's like, Poll Everywhere is even quicker to log into, and you can text.
What is it?
Poll Everywhere.
Poll.
Everywhere, we use that in the polleverywhere.com, and then same idea with bars and everything, but if you don't have a smart device,
This,
a text.
infused learning, Poll Everywhere.
It's like there's similar, yes. So
Can you
if you
draw
draw
on that?
Can you draw on that? No.
This is the only reason I like this for science class is drawing as well. Yeah, just if you have, that's the.
What do you mean draw?
Like these draw response ones, if I put this
Oh,
up.
draw the answer.
Yeah, you can draw an answer.
Okay, here's question number 2. How often does your technology wake you up in the night? All right, it's A through D. A is never. B is once or twice. This is on average. We're just going to say on average. A, never. B, once or twice. C, 3 or 4 times on average. Or D, usually more than 4 times. So how often does your technology wake you up in the night? Any kind of technology. Phone, yeah. Well, that, yeah. Hopefully not too much in the middle of the night. All right, so it seems about split between never, just A, and once or twice, which is B. So not too bad. Okay, how many students said never? Okay. So I'm assuming that some of you guys said once or twice. Okay. All right, next one. We got 2 more of these. All right. What is the number 1 21st century skill people are talking about? 21st century skill, like a skill you need to get a job now.
I'm going to do it this way for a minute because I don't want you to see what other people are saying. I want you just to think of what you think the top, what you think it is. 21st century skill. What are they using now?
All right, so we have public speaking, collaboration, innovation, social networking, technology, innovative thinking, computer programming, working groups, reading. Are there 21st century? I don't know. This is Gangnam Style. Time management, learning foreign language. Yeah, or whoever, adults too. Collaboration. Collaboration is the number 1. So working in groups, I guess. Whoever had that as well. Gangnam Style probably required some amount of collaboration. Let's just summarize what you learned if you want to do that.
Oh, okay. There you go.
All right, one last one.
Just drawing is fun. One more, drawing.
Summarize, this is drawing. Summarize what you've learned from this lecture. Do you want to do the one word or a picture? Does it have to be one or the other?
I think you could write a word.
Okay, a word or a picture. Summarize what you've learned. Are you answering these, Adam?
He couldn't get it.
That's safe, that's safe.
Does anybody have any questions for me?
When I was teaching, we talked a lot about learning styles. And I just read an article referring to a brain researcher who says he thinks that there may be learning preferences, that you may feel that you like to learn more visually or more hands-on or whatever, but that in fact, he thinks there is no such real thing as learning style, and that anybody can learn anything anyway. You don't have to play to your strengths, but you can learn it.
That's pretty much what I've alluded to, is that teaching towards a learning style is not necessarily helpful. Just good teaching practices are good teaching practices across the board. If students have specific learning disabilities, then a particular style would be helpful. But for most of us, it's not going to depend on whether you're a visual learner or an auditory learner. Just good teaching is good teaching, regardless.
So best to have a mix.
What's that?
Best to have a mix.
Yes, yes. I would think searching for information on Google, or searching for like the best deal on shoes. You're looking through a lot of stuff, you're making decisions quickly, you know. I don't necessarily think Facebook would be that, because it's not a value, I don't think it's a value to it as it is when you're like searching for good information. Yes? Shh, hush for a moment.
In your research, anything about, this technology, I don't know about you, but it seems pretty addictive to me. Anything about part of the brain in terms of addiction?
Well, that would be reward center. I mean, for me, my definition of addiction would be like chemical addiction, how brain chemistry changes for certain substances. I think that a better way, in my opinion, people have different opinions about this, is that something like an internet addiction is more of an experience that is just very reinforcing to you, and therefore a difficult habit to break. I would not consider it an actual, I mean, like I said, in my opinion, an addiction is a physical addiction. And you can call it an addiction because it's like handy to describe it as that, but I think that it's more of a reinforcement cycle. Yeah. Yeah, or a shopping addiction. You know. I mean, I think it's the same thing. Something that is very rewarding to you is difficult to give up. So that's my opinion. Anybody else? Oh, did we see what they learned? I want to see that. All right, and then there's cookies and stuff.
We did a picture. We did a picture.
Oh, I just, all right, I just, okay.
And so I just wanted to say thank you very much for Dr. Kathy Carlisle for being here tonight and sharing this. I think it was really interesting. And give a shout out to Joe Bailey, who has generously offered to record many of our lectures. Where we're putting those, we're going to put those on the wiki pages. I hope I have to work out those technical details. But Joe has been really nice to videotape several of these for people that have asked. So thanks, Joe.